Hello and welcome to today's episode of The Unmentionables. I'm your host, Connor, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado is my wonderful sister, Brooke. Brooke, you ready to do a podcast?
I sure am. How are you ready?
Oh, I'm always ready. And you always seem down for any kind of artistic project, aren't you?
I definitely am, always. Someone to dive in whenever.
When I hit you up, I texted you, I was like, hey, are you interested in doing a podcast? You're like, yeah, absolutely. Let me know when.
Yep. Just let me know when. Let me know what time works for you.
No details, just like, let's do this thing.
Totally, yeah.
I think you and I kind of share a lot of our artistic expression. I was thinking kind of back to when we were kids. Growing up, we kind of read a lot. We used to play imaginary games a lot, to put on musical shows for our parents. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit more about kind of where that artistic expression comes from and maybe try to draw connections between you and me, specifically in the realm of writing, because I don't know if our audience knows, but both you and I are big writers. We both love writing. You have, a lot of successful writing, and me, I'm kind of a in the closet writer still.
You've got a very successful campaign going.
I'm working on it. So when do you think the spark for writing rose up in you?
I think you kind of nailed it, actually, when you were talking about how we played a lot of those imaginary games together. Is I was doing that constantly, and like with any neighbor kids, like with Dad's house, there's those consistent with neighbor kids there. But at my mom's house, I had a lot of different neighbor kids I would play with, and every single time I found myself in the role of writer and director, of like, oh, what game should we play? I've got an idea. Or as we're playing the game, finding these crazy like twists and turns that we can go down, always like seeing the way that the other players would kind of look at me and be like, it works, but you're kind of crazy. You just switched everything, but like it works, and I always just loved that feeling of just being able to take people on a story and like play around with this world and characters and magic, especially. I always loved to do that, and I haven't found anything I've loved as much, frankly. So I guess that's what led me into writing a lot more.
So just being like naturally a creative and wanting to, write stories.
Definitely. And also just playing, just it's a fun thing to do. And I feel like as humans, we've been telling stories and playing games like that since before there was paper to write it down on. I think that there's just like this innate urge to understand the world in a like visual medium, you know what I mean? Or like in a story, in a metaphor, whatever it is. And I think that was always just like, it was a very easy way for me to kind of explore the world around me.
I feel like you've always been very confident when it comes to your writing, or at least like when I've seen it from you. You got into theater pretty early on, and maybe that's where a lot of that confidence came from. But for me, I didn't really find my love for writing, specifically fiction, until I went to college and I started getting really good feedback about the things that I was writing. I mean, in high school, I always got good grades in pretty much everything I did. So getting a good grade in my English classes didn't really mean anything to me. But in college, I got a scholarship from, the story that I wrote about my first job. And then, getting out of college, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons and, writing a lot of stories for that. And I started writing the book that I'm going to hopefully one day release. And I've been getting a lot of good feedback from that as well. But that is where my confidence is starting to grow. I feel like, you've like kind of always had it. You've been writing as long as I can remember some kind of story or book or script for a play. Where do you think you found that confidence?
That's a really great question, actually. When you talk about school, I would guess like that kind of rang true for me as well. I also like got pretty good grades in school, and I also found myself in like a teacher position a lot of times, especially in an English or writing class, anything like analytical like that. I always kind of found myself in this position of like, I understand what the teacher's talking about more than a lot of the students around me. So I would ask the questions that everyone else kind of was not really comprehending, and I would ask a question more for other people's sake than my own. And I feel like seeing everyone else be like, oh, I get it, and start to ask their own questions instead of just sitting there, mouths drooling, I was like, you know what? Okay, I actually do know what I'm talking about. I think I'm confident about character. I think is the biggest thing. Is I wasn't overly confident in my own writing abilities until I had a really good teacher my sophomore year of high school, but I've always been very confident in my ability to like identify character and understand people.
Yeah, I think that's a Gen Z trait that's crazy. In general, I did a podcast already with my friend Dan about Gen Z, which
Mm-hmm.
is I think firmly where you would place yourself,
Definitely.
maybe also a little bit on the cusp of millennial.
I'm too far away from the cusp. I don't remember 9/11. I don't, you know what I mean? I was born after 9/11. I'm a Gen Z. No millennial will take me serious hearing 2001.
Well, yeah, that I take you serious, but I'm also a big Gen Z supporter. So,
I appreciate it.
but one quality I love about Gen Z, and I'm kind of repeating from the last cast, is this level of confidence with character, and you guys all have this big level of transparency. And I think that really can provide a lot of confidence for your generation to be understanding of, I know who I am, everybody knows who I am, and I also know who all of these people are because we're all very transparent. Would you agree with that?
I think authenticity is one of the most important traits in people. And like whenever I'm talking to my friends about people, is a level of authenticity is very much like a kind of standard requirement in terms of like, you should be nice, you should not litter, and you should be authentic. I myself am a server, so no shade to the industry, but as a server, like you have this customer industry self that is meant to please people, but you need to leave that at the job. You know what I mean? You need to leave that there. I'm not saying that like Gen Z aren't people pleasers, because I would say that that is entirely incorrect, because I would identify myself as a people pleaser, but it's more just, yeah, authenticity of like not changing yourself all the time, because there's not really, you can't really find like a true connection with someone regardless of like what your relationship with them is, unless you know that they are being their true self and that they're not just acting a certain way to, you know, make them like someone like you know. So I would agree.
When you start hearing this feedback about your writing and you find a good teacher, which I think is one of the most important things that can provide success for a young adult, is having a good teacher between, middle school and high school years, to really take them seriously. Once you find that teacher and you receive this feedback as a Gen Z, that just must, really fulfill you and be like, oh, I am the shit. I am a good writer. I know what I'm doing.
I also would say, like, in terms of the teachers, it was always very specific. Like, the teachers that, like, I really attribute a lot of my success to, it wasn't just like, oh, good job, like, here's an A. It was like a sitting down, having a conversation about something that I wrote and being like, wow, this is really good. Here are my notes, because I believe that, you know, I believe in it.
I wanted to look at writing style. What does your like writing process look like? And I'm wondering if it's similar to mine.
I don't have a great sense of routine. I would say that at 22 years old, I have a full length musical, a full length book, and a full length script, all of which have been read, projected, however, read by a producer. People say you need to sit down and write something every day, even if it's for 10 minutes, just write something. That is not something I can do. I only write when I have something to say and if there's something I'm passionate about. For example, I took 5 years writing that script while I was writing both my musical and my book, and it was this concept that enveloped me so entirely that I had to write about it. I was seeing it everywhere. Basically what happens is I find a topic and I get so enmeshed in it that it becomes my world. I write a story about what that world looks like, and then I move on. So with my last script, the main world I was kind of living in was this overarching idea of MK Ultra, which is a program the CIA ran in the 60s that is very reminiscent of the general way that people in power treat their citizens and how they, you know, interact with them on a psychological level. And that has just enveloped me so much in understanding the world around me and how I see that I wrote a script trying to tell that story of like look around and see how your mind might be being, you know, altered in one way or another.
Politically, that makes sense, and even from a historical standpoint, I mean the more I learn about MK Ultra, more bizarre it is. And I can't wait until some lucky fellow comes across your script and accepts it, and we get to kind of see it put to use.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I see good things for it. I appreciate it.
My writing style, I mean, I'm diagnosed ADHD and on Adderall, and I still, if I don't have the mental capacity to write that day, there's nothing you can do to make me do it. You could tie me down to a computer, and there's no way I would write a single word. I have to have some kind of motivation to do that writing, and that's, I think, what makes it difficult to write a book. I write 2 chapters, 3 chapters in one sitting because I have that drive and that motivation. But then I don't pick it up for 30 days because and it's not even writer's block. I think about all these things that I could write in it, but it's not until I have that motivation to really to do that. And also, again, I think I'm similar to you. I just write what comes to mind. I don't have any kind of script or idea of where it's going necessarily. It's just, okay, let's just write and let's make these ideas work, and let's add a little twist and turn here to keep the readers engaged. How do you manage the motivational aspect of writing? How do you, kind of force yourself to sit down and write when you're not feeling, the most into whatever you're writing, or does that just not happen to you?
I mean, we are related, so it doesn't surprise me how similar we are, but my style is so similar to yours that ultimately I try to not force myself to be motivated on a like words on page level. My process is kind of insane where it's very similar to yours, where I'll sit down and I'll have the motivation, but I don't stop. I do not stop. I do not leave that chair until I have nothing else to say, nothing else to write. So usually what happens is I end up writing my first draft within a day or two, like within like 2 p.m. to 3 a.m., for example. I will sit down and I will write it start to finish, and then I'll spend the next like year and a half editing and adding to it, which I think that helps with my motivation a lot. Is I've already got a beginning and I've already got an ending and I've already got words on the page. And all I have to do is add in scenes or change a little dialogue here and there. Um, and then it doesn't feel so daunting to me, I think, of I still have the entire second and third act to write, and I'm still stuck in this first act because I'm trying to make sure I have enough foreshadowing for something I haven't even written yet, because things change as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, if you plan for act 1 to go one way, act 2 to go another way, and act 3 to go a third way, for me, like sometimes my characters surprise me, or like my own plots surprise me a little bit. Of I'm like, oh well, that just doesn't work anymore, like that's just not the direction the script is going. So by sitting down and just writing everything I possibly can all at once, it kind of helps me to take the time on each scene and each chapter like individually.
Yeah, that's actually kind of wild.
I know, it's kind of insane. I wrote Honeybee in 2 days. I wrote my book I took the longest on my book, to be fair. I think I wrote my book in total probably 2 weeks. And then, because Honeybee was straight up 2 days. Yeah, 2 weeks on my book. And then my script, I wrote the first draft in also a week, but it was like 600 pages of content that I turned into like, 120 for, a 2.5 hour movie.
So you just didn't sleep, eat, or anything during this time?
If like a lot of times when I write, I also like, I'll sit crisscross applesauce, or like I'll sit in a funky position. I'll like move around in the chair a lot. Once I start to get too restless or like I cramp up, usually I like will get up, walk to get water if my water has become empty, because I don't drink a lot of water anyway, frankly. But I have like a water bottle that I try to carry around with me. If that's empty, I'll go fill it up. If I get up to eat, I bring the food back to the computer with me and I eat it while I do it. I smoke during it, to be fair.
But you're not sleeping.
Not really, no.
You said you smoked during it?
A little bit, like, yeah, especially with, like, if a lot of my content does involve drugs. Honeybee had nothing to do with drugs. My book in particular had a lot to do with drugs. It was kind of not really about drugs, but it's kind of about drugs. So I wanted it to be accurate, so I would be smoking while I was writing it, so it was accurate, and that also kind of helps.
And just to confirm for the listeners, she's not talking about like smoking meth. She's talking about smoking
that's
weed.
true. Because if you read my book, you'll be curious.
Unless you're talking about smoking meth, because then, you know, I think that you and I need to have a off the podcast conversation. But
that would be a deeper conversation. Yeah, right. No, I mean, my book does have heavier drugs like heroin, whereas the heroin's the big one. But I have not done my research that detailed on heroin. Yeah, no, we're good there. Just marijuana.
Good. Yeah, please save that for when you're old or something.
When I'm like 80.
Or never. That works too.
Good way to go.
Yeah, exactly. It's transitioning the cast into your specific works. You know, as you've kind of already outlined, you have Honeybee, which is your first, I would say, successful work.
Definitely.
And then you have your book, and now you have your script. I wanted to talk about Honeybee because based off of our dynamic growing up, I was away for a lot of the year with my mom, and then we would, you know, reconvene during the summer for a few months. So I never really saw the writing process. I never really saw you write Honeybee. I just came to the show and was blown away. I was like, hold on, my sister wrote this? Like, it absolutely blew my mind because it felt, you know, just like any other real show. It didn't feel like something a high schooler wrote.
Thank you.
So will you kind of talk to me maybe about the journey of Honeybee?
So Honeybee is an interesting one for me because it was a collaborative project with myself doing the book and my good friend and really talented musician, Jenny Henry, doing the music on that. Basically, her and I were performing in a show called Rent together. It's a very popular show. It's one of my favorites. It's an amazing show. We love Rent. I was playing Maureen for anyone listening because that's a sleigh, and I try to say it as often as I can because it's the coolest thing other than Honeybee. We were in Rent together, and we were having a pretty profound summer of Rent. You know, it's a really profound show to be in, and making deep friendships during such a profound show was pretty, like, it was kind of a coming of age moment for us. So that's when we kind of started writing Honeybee. And it wasn't any like words on paper, it was much as it was just her and I talking about the idea of writing a show and what that might look like. And then one day we're just kind of like, okay, let's do it. So we sat down and we kind of talked about what we want the plot to look like, how we want the music and the tone to be. And then we just kind of like split at that point. And within, I think it was 2 days, I had busted out the book. And the other thing is my friend Jenny and I have also written a lot of songs together just for fun. And so we put a lot of the songs that we had written for fun just together into the script. And that kind of, you know, helped me with the plot a little bit as I already had music that because her and I also both, I did do some of the lyricism, none of the actual composition, but it came out to just about 50-50 of she did about half the lyrics and I did about the other half. Her and I sat down and busted out a bunch of songs. I busted out 2 days worth of book, and then I edited it for a little while. And so that one's a little different, but because it was collaborative, you know, but we took a lot of inspiration from our own lives and being best friends in such a vulnerable time, being 14, 15 to 16, 17.
Yeah, you guys talked about some really dark tones in the book or in the play. You know, there's this heavy idea of, you know, grief and suicide, which both your generation and you know the later stages of my generation, we started going through. I think this, you know, this big shift where technology kind of took over all of our lives, and we weren't, I would say, mentally ready for it. And so I think there was a lot of side effects to that. And I mean, I think I can't think of a single person in my, you know, young friend group who hasn't experienced somebody close to them or somebody near them having like had a suicide attempt or, you know, killing themselves. That tone in Honeybee was something that really hit me at home. How was writing some of that? Was that something that was like kind of freeing you from your trauma or like kind of trying to help you process it, as well as some of the other dark themes that you talked about? Was that you kind of processing your trauma?
It kind of was. was, but it wasn't ever meant to be. Ultimately, it's a little embarrassing now, and I can't speak for Jenny on this, but I would say writing it was relishing in my own darkness. It was a way for me to just like get in there and really do it, if like I got to really get into that mind space and put it on paper and make this like world that I got to take away. I started writing it when I was deep in the throes of my own mental health issues. But then once we had it produced by a local children's theater company called Soul by the most wonderful woman in the world, Jennifer Johnson, love her to pieces. Once I started directing it, I had grown enough in my own life to kind of get out of that mindset. And I would say that's when my own healing process really began.
In my book, I touch on suicide as well. And I also just touch on, really negative mental health for artists and why it's so difficult for these artists once they find success to continue with success. I like to think of some rappers, like Mac Miller, who ended up dying from a drug overdose. He grew up and he always had this like very negative headspace and he wasn't very confident. And he kind of channeled all of that into his art, into his music. And then when he became famous and he found success and all of these, insecurities and all of these feelings that he had, were kind of taken away, what was left? And so he kept going back to that negative place, forcing him into this negative place because that's where he found his, muse.
And I think people grow comfortable in the darkness as well. Of like once you lose whatever makes you dark or whatever makes you not happy, how can you choose to be happy when you've been sad your whole life? It's the only thing that's comfortable. It's how you've learned to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people when they turn to art, it's because they want to find these connections. And I think one of the most powerful connections that humans have is this idea of our shared trauma. And I think whether it's looking at an art piece or listening to music or, watching a show or a play, the triumphs are great. You feel good, you get that dopamine rush when the protagonist triumphs over, the villain, but you feel these really deep emotional connections when you watch the character go through something similar or adjacent to what you've gone through. And I think that can be very very provoking as well.
Definitely. It like builds a sense of connection to the whole. It reminds us we're all human and we all experience human things.
So when you produced Honeybee, you said that, that was kind of your healing time. Can you kind of go more into that?
Yeah, so I think that for me, like the biggest difference between there's not a whole lot of difference, I guess, actually, between writing and directing. They are both the idea of creating a world. When I'm writing, the world I'm creating does not involve anybody except the reader. None of these characters are real. Once I was directing, I had real actors that were portraying these characters, and I had real actors with experiences of their own. And being in a state of leadership, I had their, emotional sides that I wanted to cater to as well, because I can't write a show about healing from a suicide and then have the whole cast be in the back, like, asphyxiating themselves or something.
Right. Yeah.
So I had this, it was like these characters that were metaphors to me, I guess, were suddenly being portrayed in front of me. And I was at a point where I was much, much more mentally stable already. I'd already done my own work to move out of it. And on top of that, there was like a fire that lit in me while I was directing. I've only ever gotten that same fire from writing or, again, playing imaginary games when I'm like 5. But there was a fire that just was lit in me of I could do this nonstop. I could do this and not sleep and not eat, and I could just dive into this so heartily forever. And I loved directing. I would love to direct again, but it was a combination of I found something that I was good at, that I wanted to do, that I loved doing, that I felt like myself in. And on top of that, it was something that I thought would touch people, of like, I finally was who I wanted to be, doing the things I wanted to be doing. And the things that I was doing are hopefully making the world a bit of a better place. And I think that was healing for me in particular, because it's kind of all anyone wants in life, of do the things you want and feel good doing them, and hopefully leave it a little better than you found it. I think that's kind of what it's all about.
I mean, and weren't you like 16, 17 years old at this time? I mean, those are some pretty advanced, mature thoughts that you must have been having to explore at such a young age. I mean, some people never learn those kinds of qualities. You must be very proud to have, gone through that and learned those lessons at such a young age. I mean, were you 16, 17?
I was directing it at 18, but I started writing it at 14. I was 17, 18 when
right.
I was directing it, because it was 2019.
Yeah, even still, that's when I was 18, that is not what I was thinking about. I was mostly thinking about women and, how to get myself in trouble. But
I was doing a lot of that too, don't get me wrong.
Thinking about women and how to get in trouble?
Yep. But yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. I think I had a bit of a head start though, because ever since I was a kid, the only thing I liked more than playing imaginary games was reading or learning new things. I always loved learning, and it connected me to people that most of the family doesn't really like. I was able to connect to these unsavory characters through this love of learning things. And so I spent all the time I could learning things and growing, and I've always had a really big love of philosophy as well. And I've also always been an insomniac. I think that's actually a really big thing. Is I remember before going into kindergarten, I would lay in bed and look up at the popcorn ceiling. And I was like, okay, so the popcorn ceiling is one big square, but if I imagine another littler square and another littler square, and then you have the popcorn, and inside that popcorn is a littler popcorn, and just figured out atoms on my own before kindergarten, just because I was thinking, I was just sitting there thinking and staring around, So I think that a lot of people just don't think enough. I think people need to spend more time staring at a wall, honestly.
We'll make sure that that's in your presidential campaign. Everybody needs to think more, stare at walls.
Yeah, no, for real. Can everyone please just find a cave and just sit in it for 2 years, but without there being a pandemic? Go willingly sit in a cave and think a little bit about who you are and what that means.
That is strangely some real philosophical advice. I feel like I would read that in a book.
Well, thank you. So I mean it.
You definitely have this wisdom about you, and that's why I wanted you, on the cast as one of our rotating hosts. Is you do have this wisdom, and especially from a Gen Z perspective, I want to showcase that to the world. Wrapping up, did you have any other thoughts about writing or anything else you wanted to talk about?
Honestly, not too much. I guess when my script comes out, it's called Divine 1969. The biggest thing I'm looking for right now is a producer, in particular Donald Glover. If you're listening, please produce my script. I would love it. And yeah, that would be about it.
Well, thanks for coming on today. We're definitely going to have you on again, I hope. And with that being said, that's going to wrap us up for this episode. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Unmentionables Cast, your weekly bite-sized dose of nonsense. If you liked the show, tell your friends. And if you didn't, well, recommend us to your adversaries and we'll torture them on your behalf. If you want to get in contact with us, send all questions, comments, concerns, issues, problems, and suggestions to the unmentionablescast@gmail.com. The show will always be free, but if you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/theunmentionables. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, thumbs up, or ring a bell to help pump up those juicy stats for us, and we'll catch you next week. And now I do this little thing where I pause. All right. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Unmentionables Cast, your week-sized...